it's take your son to work today. I brought a snake for you to look at because
Albino
I
what?
know this is a palmetto corn snake.
Corn snake, yeah.
Yeah, but I know you like snakes. Last time I
Yeah,
interviewed you, we discussed snakes.
that's really sweet. He's a little leucistic, and albino snakes are really cute.
You know your snakes. I mean, of
Yeah,
course, I'm not surprised. So I thought he'd sit in. He's pretty, as you know,
yeah,
corn
yeah,
snakes are
yeah.
pretty docile. So I thought he'd just like sit in and learn on the job and see how it's
How many
done.
snakes do you have?
I have just one. I had another snake, another corn snake named White Snake that I think I told you about before, but
I
she
do
passed
remember
away.
that because you can't forget that. The only snake
It
I've
was
ever
a moment.
remembered.
It was a moment, but unfortunately I didn't know this was a thing, but in 2020 she got cancer because 2020 anything could have happened, so she passed away. But
Oh, I
then,
lost a cat to in 2022 to cancer.
oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But
That year just sucked.
yeah, well, I hate to start, let's talk about happier things, but we'll start now. So actually, it's been almost 4 years since I last interviewed you, which was when the last Conspirators record came out. And that's the last time we've heard some original music from this band. So I am curious, were you working on this record during the pandemic? Because you're such a touring machine between the Conspirators and, of course, Guns N' Roses, and then everything was on hold. Was this how you occupied yourself during that time?
It was part of it. I set my sights on this at some point. We did this record last April. So I guess leading up to that, I started doing demos for the record at home by myself because I couldn't get everybody into a room to jam. But I definitely, there was a point there where I said, well, I'm going to start working on this next Conspirators record because this is ridiculous. Because, so I had some material that we'd written during the Living the Dream tour, around the time that you and I last spoke. And so I had that on tape. And so I pulled those songs out and worked on them. And then I wrote some new stuff and made demos of everything and sent it out to the guys. And I worked on a bunch of other stuff as well, Guns N' Roses stuff and some other ancillary sessions and appearances and this and that.
Very
Yeah.
cool. So you must be excited now that the Conspirators are touring. You must be excited to be playing playing anything, but playing it all. But playing new music must be very exciting for you after all that
Yeah, this
downtime.
is definitely an exciting time because, all that downtime and actually producing a record in the midst of the pandemic and getting it done, but we didn't release it until now. So it's been 10 months. So there's a lot of sort of pin up, whatever, being released, just getting the record out after that long. I've never had that long of a turnaround period before. And then to get out and just start playing and having new songs in the set. And we did a pretty eclectic set where we did a lot of old stuff, or we are doing a lot of old stuff and whatnot. So it's nice to be out here. I'm in a hotel in Phoenix about to go to sound check. And yeah, so it's good to be out.
Are there any songs on this album, obviously the fourth album by the Conspirators, that speak to the conditions we're talking about, what was going on in the world at that time that you'd like to mention?
You're right. Well, I'll try and make a long story short. I wrote a bunch of music during the sort of pandemic period, but there was only a certain amount of songs that were really sort of inspired by the situation. And those particular songs are what I put on this record because of the timing of it. So there's I guess 5 songs that are all influenced by either lockdowns or people being out of work or, whatever. From a musical point of view, lyrically, they might not be about that, but the music was definitely inspired by current events.
I
you know.
was sorry to be naive, but as someone who doesn't write music herself, I can understand how lyrics are inspired by current events, but how is music, like how is guitar playing inspired by that sort of thing?
Guitar playing is, I mean, for me especially, is very emotional. So it's for me, it's like the only real tool for communicating. I mean, verbally, I can do this, answer questions and all that, but I'm not the most outspoken person. So for me to really emote it musically is the best way to do it. So if I'm playing my guitar and things are in a certain state, either positive or negative, whatever I'm playing usually can reflect that. And sometimes I'll write something just based on what's going on around me. And so that's where that happens. So it's not verbal, but
I see. Are there specific songs on 4 that you would single out as being like particularly fueled by all this?
yeah, there was Rivers Rising is one, which is musically and lyrically influenced by what was going on. And then there's a song called Fill My World that was born out of it, a song called Call Off the Dogs, which was definitely one of those get the let out frustration, of being pent up for too long kind of songs. And there was another one called Spirit Love as well. And so those were all, they were all pandemic babies. Yeah.
What do you obviously, like I said, this is the 4th album. You seem like a workaholic because obviously, in the last few years, Guns N' Roses has been back touring nonstop so successfully. You don't have to do anything else. Like you could just, that's a full-time job in itself. What do you get out of this project that it's a band, we're 4 albums in already.
Yeah. Well, I started doing it. Let's see, I guess it was after Velvet Revolver. And I just put together a record that was an idea that I had where I just write all this music and then I get all these different people to sing on it. And so in 2010, I did that and I met Miles Kennedy, right? And obviously during this period, I wasn't in Guns N' Roses, hadn't been in Guns N' Roses for a long time, and it wasn't going to be for any time in the foreseeable future. And so I met Miles Kennedy doing that record, and he was amazing. I'd never heard him sing before, and I thought, well, let me see if he'll sing for this tour that I have to put together to support this record. And so he said yes. And so I put a band together and we went out and started playing in support of that first solo record. And we had such a great time doing it. I thought, well, if I was going to do another record, I would just do it with these guys, right? And so we did a record called Apocalyptic Club and went out and toured on that and just had a great time. And we just been continuing to do that for the fun of it all the way up until like all of a sudden we're on our 4th record and we've been together literally 12 years now, so it's really just for the fun of it. And we, it's cool because, Guns N' Roses, which is something that I got back into during my career with Miles Kennedy. And that is this really big, epic kind of, different kind of a thing. And it's great. And I love it, but I'm keeping the Conspirators together because I love that down to earth sort of toe to toe with the audience kind of vibe, so.
Well, speaking of epic, there's one thing I have to ask you about Guns N' Roses because Google is my friend, Wikipedia is my friend. And I discovered that this week, February 18th, is the 30th anniversary of the November Rain music video.
Oh, no way. Really?
Yeah, I know, right? One of the most expensive music videos of all time. The first music video, I'm looking at the stats here, to surpass the first music video that was made before the YouTube era to hit 1 billion views on YouTube. The first music video from the 1990s to hit 1 million views on YouTube. I have to ask about it because it's so over the top and so epic. And, I'm still kind of trying to figure out what the story was, but I mainly want to ask you about we can get into that, but I want to ask you about the iconic church scene because that's so iconic that Avril Lavigne parodied it later. I'm sure you saw that.
No, I didn't see that. Really?
She did that in a music video where I remember, I got to think of the name of it later, but she literally comes out of the church and does a guitar solo, and it's a nod to November. I'm surprised you haven't seen that. It was about 10 years ago.
I have never seen it. I have to check that out.
I'll look it up. But yeah, tell me about making that video because that took video making to a whole, not just for Guns N' Roses, but in general, to another level.
We've been doing videos with the same production company from the beginning. And there was this guy, Andy Morahan, who was a director, and he got on with this November Rain thing. And, November Rain as a video was really Axl's kind of brainchild, and I don't even know exactly what it's about. But, and I was always that guy who was sort of like, I really could care less about concept videos and all that kind of stuff. So I just would write my own part, like this is what I'll do. And you guys do whatever. And so when the guitar solo came, Andy and I sat down and talked about it. And he had the idea of doing it out in the church out where Silverado was shot. I think that's where it was in New Mexico. And I was like, cool. But he didn't tell me that they were going to be doing dive bomb shots with me with a helicopter. And when I got out onto the set and did my thing, then I noticed that this helicopter would come back and forth at extremely fast speeds and get really, really low. And I thought, well, this will be my last day on Earth. So I was, trying to look cool. Right?
Were you actually scared?
It was the kind of thing where you just resigned to the fact that you're probably going to die. And at that point in time, I was pretty much had that, I didn't have very much fear of death in those days.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we shot it, and I had no idea what it was going to look like afterwards, but it ended up looking pretty cool, but I didn't know it was going to be as memorable, as it turned out to be.
Yeah. I just looked it up. So when you have a moment, look up a music video by Avril Lavigne called Rock and Roll. Came out in like 2012 or 2013, around then. She completely parodies this scene. But yeah, so you don't know what the story's about, because I'm still trying to figure out how the bride, played by Stephanie Seymour, passed away.
Yeah, it's a 3-part, it's a trilogy, because there was Don't Cry, November Rain, and Estranged, all part of the same story. And really, Axl would be the best to walk you through it, because I was never really present for all of that. I just showed up to do, because I just could never get into the whole. It's funny because I produce horror movies now, but in the video, I really just couldn't get into the cinematic and theatric, kind of concept thing. So I would just do my part,
Well, I'm wondering, because obviously Guns N' Roses starting off as being, and kind of the antithesis to a lot of other things that were kind of going on in the LA scene. You were, no diss to bands like Poison or whatever, but there was this, you were like grittier, more from the street, what you sang about, the image. Was there ever a part, the first music video I ever saw by you guys was obviously Welcome to Jungle and Sweet Child Mine. They were pretty straight ahead videos, filmed at Scream or whatever. And so like when you got to these videos that were much more high concept, huge budget, storylines, trilogy, special effects, helicopters, were you like, how did we get here? How did this happen? Like, it was so different from how it started,
Well, we still did some really cool down to earth raw videos off that record as well. But Axl had this one thing for these 3 songs. And I was, just like, I guess at that point, the band was playing stadiums and doing all that kind of stuff. And so it didn't faze me all that much, as long as it wasn't, it didn't infringe too much on everything else, Anyway, so, I don't remember complaining about it too much. I think at the end of the day, the whole sort of trilogy, like releasing the videos, there was a feeling of like, wow, we've actually gotten to this point where we're shooting on the top of a building downtown with a helicopter. Well, for Don't Cry. And I remember taking a Mustang off of a cliff, and I think it was just sort of like an acceptance of the indulgence at that point, It
was an exciting time. It was indulgent in many ways, obviously.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you didn't fear death much at that time. I do want to pick up just as one more Guns N' Roses question, because there's another anniversary happening this year, which is it's the 35th anniversary of Appetite, which is crazy. I feel like we just celebrated the 30th of it.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, 87, right? So it's 35th. And I read actually an interview you did recently for this Conspirators record where you discussed about the fame. It wasn't immediate. It took about a year, but once the fame from Appetite really kicked in, how it really kind of blindsided you and messed you up a little bit at that time.
Yeah. Well, I got into this purely for just the love of playing guitar and wanted to be in a rock and roll band and go out and play. And we had a blast doing it. And on that level, it was very street and it was very sort of natural. Right. Mm-hmm. And then they got to a point where, you get to be so well known that you can't go anywhere without people. And it's very superficial on, like the kind of attention that you're getting to. At least that's the way I felt. It's just like you're the sort of this trend. So people are attracted to you because they recognize you, and there's nothing else to it. It's just this sort of weird kind of new reality. So I ended up just staying in my place, and I was just getting loaded, and that was basically, until we would go back to work, and then I would get my shit together and go. Yeah. But
Okay.
I don't think that I really appreciated getting all that attention unless I was playing. If I wasn't playing, I didn't feel comfortable. I'm still like that. It's just not, doesn't speak to me personally.
It's interesting to me that you say that even though, you had your indulgences, that when it came time to do the music, you got professional or whatever.
Within reason. I mean, I still drank, but that was always very just normal to me. But all the other stuff I would have to kick to the curb so I could go out and tour and all that and function properly.
I mean, I know you've been sober since about 2005, 2006. Is your workaholism, obviously you've been doing the Conspirators for a while. Now you're doing Guns N' Roses as well. You obviously played on lots of other people's records. Does working and focusing on that kind of help with your...
I mean, I've always been a workaholic and a busybody and obsessed with everything that's going on. But it's having a nursing a real chemical dependence is a big responsibility, and you have to deal with it every day. So it takes a good chunk of time, So when I got clean, I took all that extra time that I was wasting on my extracurricular activities, and it just naturally went back into music. So now I'm workaholic on 10, but it's good. It keeps me sane. Listen, man, I mean, if I hadn't quit doing what I was doing, I never would have made it through the pandemic. I'd be dead. Because I could not have handled that kind of like shift in pace, where all of a sudden you're staring at an abyss of how long you're going to be grounded. Oh, and so I mean, all things considered, I don't think I would have been able to do half the stuff I've done in the last 15 years had I not gotten my shit together. So yeah, the pandemic would have been a disaster for me, because I, like not being able to tour and having that thing to sort of focus on and grab onto would have been a disaster. But now I've sort of, been able to learn how to be patient and focus. I did a lot of writing and recording, and I figured out ways of getting through it.
I am curious. I actually just recently interviewed Macklemore, who, as I'm sure is very open about his sobriety, and he's a real activist about it. And he has been sober for the most part for about 13 years, but he did talk about the fact that he relapsed during the pandemic. We discussed that. He mentioned it on Dak Shepard's podcast. Dak Shepard also has been very open about the fact that he relapsed. A lot of people who have a history of addiction, understandably, it was a challenging time, and a lot of people did relapse. It sounds like you did not. Did you have any moments where it was like touch and go, or where you had to really kind of like really work hard?
Well, the thing is I did it to the hilt for so long. And as a lot of other people have too. But I mean, for me, every time I ever even the idea of going in that direction popped up in my mind, it brought back such ugly memories that I've never felt really compelled to go through with it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like, which is good. It's a safeguard, because I don't have any regrets about that period. And I'm not what you call a sobriety flag waver, because I'm sober out of necessity more than anything. I loved a lot of I used to do, but it got to a point where it wasn't fun anymore, and you couldn't recapture that high from the first time that you did it. And it was just all a illusion. And it took me a long time, but finally able to put it in perspective and to admit to myself, the whole AA thing, but to really come to terms with the fact that I was up, and then finally change it. So, all things considered, even during the pandemic, the idea of a Guinness probably sounds good, but I know where that goes. And so it's just end of conversation.
Wow. I do have to ask you kind of a silly question, but, given all the things that you've put your body through, the health scares, the alcohol and drug abuse, you look the same. This could be 1987, me looking at you. This could be 1992. You're like, you You look the same. This is probably why you got recognized so much. Like people see you, people know what Slash looks like. How have you not, with everything you've been through, how are you so ageless? You look the same.
I mean, I wouldn't even know where to.
What do you do? What's your regimen? What's your secret?
I think I quit just in the nick of time before I, lost all my teeth and everything else. But I try to keep myself in reasonable shape to be able to work and all that. I'm not a diehard, like one of these people that's part of that whole, health trends and this and that and dietary this and, but I mean, I do what I think within reason to keep myself able to function and able to go out and do this every single day for anywhere from an hour 45 to 3 hours every night. And I'm so driven to do that. I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. That's the only thing I could say.
And I mean, obviously you have a really iconic look. So another random question I want to ask you is, just recently there was a pop-up of the store Retail Slut. That was a famous store in Melrose and Hollywood.
No way, really?
There was a pop-up. I bought all this Retail Slut gear and I was like telling people how this was such an important store. Isn't that the store where you bought your?
I didn't buy it. That's where I stole my hat out of that place.
You did tell me the story of that. I mean, that's a badge of honor for that store.
There was 2 stores next to each other, Leathers and Treasures and Retail Slut. Mm-hmm. And Guns was playing at the Whiskey. This was like 1985. And Guns was playing at the Whiskey. And I was like looking around for some clothes and I didn't have any money. And so I'm walking by Retail Slut and I think I saw the top hat through the glass in the back of the store, like the front window. I could see through the glass to the back of the store and I saw the hat on a shelf. And Tammy used to run that store. Tammy Down from Fast Pussycat. Mm-hmm. So I went in there and I knew he'd not be paying that much attention, And so I just haven't walked out with it. And I figured if anybody stopped me, I'd be, oh yeah, oh sorry, whatever. Anyway, so I got the hat and then I went next door to Retail Slut and I snagged a concho belt. Now I'm not advocating that, being a thief. It's just, at the time it was desperate times. And so I got the belt and I went back to the apartment me and Axel were staying in. And I took the belt and I cut it up and put it around the hat and wore it that night. And it just became a thing. So that's really the long and short of it. But did Tammy have anything to do with this pop-up?
Well, I do know that there were, it was part of Lethal Amounts, the gallery Lethal Amounts that you might know of in downtown LA. And they recreated the store. They even had like old mannequins and merch from the store. And, it was pretty epic. I do know they had some past employees show up. I don't know if Tammy was one of them. But when I was looking up research about the store, I saw that it had something to do with your hat. So I had,
I didn't know
put it on the map. But it's interesting because you said that, when you first became famous, like it was hard to deal with the fact that, like you couldn't, whatever, go the rainbow and just have a drink or whatever, like everyone would recognize you. But like, did you ever try to go incognito, like take off the hat, take off the sunglasses, put the hair in a man bun? Maybe you could slip under the radar.
That back then it wasn't that. I don't think that was something that I would even have dreamed of doing back then because I was who I was and God damn it, I wasn't going to change for anybody. Right? It wasn't until way later that I started to adopt that, like, look, I'm going to market and just need to, but yeah, back in the day, I'd rather just not go out or whatever. You get it very stubborn, and ideological when you're in your early 20s and got your thing going, you don't want to in for anybody. So no.
You saying how, and of course, doing music was the original goal, but did you really not think that what you were doing, I'm thinking of movies like The Decline of Western Civilization 2 or whatever. It's populated with all these bands like Odin or whatever that were like, we're going to be the biggest band in the world. You didn't think that?
No, and I it's funny. I remember that movie because the first one was so good, and then the second one was so pathetic, and we almost were in that. What's her name?
Penelope Spheres.
Penelope came up to me on Hollywood Boulevard one day, and pulled up along. I was walking down the street with Duff, I think it was, and she pulled up. Hey, do you want to be in doing Decline. Second one is heavy metal one and all that. And we thought, oh, that'd be really, really cool. And our manager at the time ended up blowing it off because of exactly what he saw was going to happen with it and what we were going to be representative. And so, good for him, because Duff and I didn't see that. We just thought like it would be cool exposure or whatever. Anyway, but so no, my whole thing, obviously you have the dreams of playing in an arena and all that kind of stuff because of all these bands that you were influenced. So cool doing all that. But it was really more about just doing the next thing right in front of you, which was like you playing a Wednesday night at the Troubadour. It'd be great to be able to play a weekend, or trying to, back in the pay to play days, trying to sell tickets and so you're just trying to move up the ladder. And I don't think I spent any time with illusions of grandeur beyond where we were at. It was always about just getting to the next level right in front of you. Right. So, I mean, that was it. And then when we finally like had a record deal and that was happening when we were, signed on to go open for the Cult, we'd arrived. I didn't see beyond that. I didn't imagine headlining Long Beach Arena at that time,
Well, that's interesting because when Guns N' Roses first toured, I don't know if this was for the entire tour, but I saw the Dodger Stadium show and you had the Cult open for you guys at that show. Was that sort of like a paying it forward, saying thanks?
I think it was more just that we're friends and we've got this gig, and if those guys wanted to come and play, that it'd be really cool, that kind of thing. I guess paying it forward is one way of looking at it. I don't think it was consciously that. We're still the band that opened for them.
You're still humble for sure. I do want to ask, since you've mentioned Duff a couple of times and we've talked a lot about addiction, sobriety. I've interviewed Duff as well, and he's had his own health scares as well related to alcohol, and both you guys are doing great, and he's doing his own solo work as well, which is fabulous. Do you guys like lean on each other for support in terms, or have you in the past? Like, do you guys ever like talk about the fact that it's, sometimes it's kind of incredible to realize you've been through all this and you're all still here and doing so great?
Well, we've been really tight for a really, really long time. So yeah, I mean, there's been any number of different scenarios where we've leaned on each other for support, and whatever else. I mean, we've always sort of been there for each other, through all this stuff. So,
It's awesome. So, you guys obviously were in Velvet Revolver together. And I also remember that, when you guys came in with Velvet Revolver, and then there was the success with the Guns N' Roses tour, and then the fact that there's a success with the Conspirators 4 albums in, it shows that there's still a hunger for this kind of rock and roll out there. I mean, we saw it when Velvet Revolver was so successful, it sold like a couple million albums. People still wanted this. And I feel like we've been hearing rock is dead. Like we've been hearing that for like since the 90s practically. And
I remember hearing it at the end of the 70s.
Really?
Yeah. When New Wave came along.
Oh yeah.
When that whole shift happened.
When like the Knack came around and stuff.
Yeah, it was Elvis Costello and Devo and the Knack and this and that and the other. And rock and roll was dead and guitar was dead. Mm-hmm. And then it happened again that really sort of went on, even though there was a heavy metal, like a European heavy metal scene that was happening. But that was all through the 80s, that rock is dead kind of thing. And then going into the 90s, and you had that little that whole sort of really heavy duty grunge period, and then it was over, and then rock was dead again.
The electronic music thing that happened then with like Chemical Brothers and Moby and stuff like that. So yeah, we've been hearing that for a while, and we're hearing it again, particularly these days where it's not what's driving radio or record sales or streaming. What are your thoughts on this? Because I feel music is cyclical. And
yeah, I do what it is. I do what it is that I do. I've never really been adhered to any of the sort of passing trends as they come and they go. But I feel like, that's what makes me happy, and that's what I do. And if there's somebody that's an audience to play it for, then I'll definitely be there to play it for them, But at the same time, I don't have any fear of rock dying, because there's an attitude and a spirit and a whole thing about rock and roll that is the only place for it. You know what I mean? There's the only real release for that kind of being. Like that kind of music is the only place you're going to find it. So it'll always be there. Whether it's commercially viable or not, it all depends on what's happening and where the industry's at. I mean, a lot of what's happening right now is completely constructed by the music industry, and so they sort of pick and choose, really, in a way, what is popular and what's not popular, because that's their way of guaranteeing that they can sell some records. They don't like to take any risks, but it's the public that at the end of the day will turn around and go, well, we're going to do this. And the record companies will shift in order to support that. So you just have to sort of ride the wave and or lack thereof and wait and see what happens. But I'll just continue doing what I do. I don't give a.
Well, as you should. It is interesting, though, when I think about what rock bands or artists in general are up against today, because actually I'm literally thinking this just now, but we were talking about, I mentioned that when Appetite came out, it was not a hit right away. The Geffen worked it really hard, and it was probably about a year in when it really exploded. The kind of success that that album had, I don't think would exist now, because I don't think a record label would stay behind a single and a second single and put a band on tour with, like the way they did with bands back in that era.
I mean, that's the beginning of a long conversation, because I mean, what's been happening industry-wise, really since the late 90s and all through the millennium is the record business creating what it is that everybody's going to listen to. And the music, the development, A&R and development, finding a new artist that's really talented and really helping them to arrive at their potential and all that's all gone. Nowadays, you have to have a top 40 single in your first release, or they're just going to let you go. It's a really sort of material, a money-minded and materially constructed kind of industry right now. And it's, really, I think kids, a lot of young people and a lot of young kids are creating their own sort of music business under the radar through all the social networks and stuff. And they have this whole sort of culture created amongst themselves. And a lot of them, there's a groundswell of kids that are just doing it for the love of the music. And it's not about the industry anymore. It's not about acceptance. It's not about making a lot of money. They've all resigned to the idea that there's nothing to be gained in it except for to have a good time playing. And that's really actually what it's all about. And that's what created this industry. It was people doing music for people. And then when people start seeing that there could be money made from it, then it turns into an industry, right? So anyway, so it's almost going back to the beginning and starting over.
Are there any rock bands on your radar, new young bands that you sort of feel that you're excited about and you feel kind of carry on this spirit?
Well, I mean, there's a ton of young bands. I couldn't really name all the ones that I've been sort of hip to in the last 3 or 4 years, but then there was a couple that have become a little bit more sort of popular that we worked with early on. One of them is Dirty Honey.
They're great.
And all of a sudden they're becoming very well known. But, a couple of years ago, they were just opening for us for the Conspirators, just doing, theaters and clubs and stuff. And I thought they were cool then. And it's really great to see that themselves. And, there's a Joyous Wolf band that's sort of a similar kind of a rock and roll band. And then there's some other bands in Europe. There's one called the Viagra Boys that are amazing.
I love the Viagra Boys so much. Sports is the best song ever.
That video is great. My kid turned me on to that. So, I mean, there's a whole world of stuff happening that's not mainstream, but it's getting there. It has its own following. And I think that, it's actually, in a way, it's great to be successful, but it's also cool to be just part of a clique where a certain bunch of people find you and you become theirs. And it doesn't have to become blown out of proportion like successful. I don't know. I always thought Guns N' Roses would never be bigger than, say, like a Motorhead back in the day, where it was just like a certain flavor for certain people, and we could sustain on just that, and then all of a sudden it did blow out of proportion. But yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, this is such a loaded or open-ended question, but what do you think it was about Guns N' Roses that made them bigger than Motorhead? I mean, Faster Pussycat, there were a lot, LA Guns, there were a lot of good bands coming up in that scene, and you guys were the one.
There was definitely a sincerity and like an honesty in the attitude and stuff that we were about, that was definitely over and above a lot of other bands. But not saying that we were more sincere than, say, Motorhead.
No band's more sincere than Motorhead,
right? So it's hard to say exactly what it was. There was something about it, the package in its entirety, that appealed to a lot of people, and I could never really say what that, I think was all these different elements. I never really knew what it was.
One of the things I would say, I've actually theorized, I talked about this recently, is there are some bands where like only the lead singer is known. It's like that's the only name, that's the only person you might recognize on the street. But there are certain bands, even a band like Duran Duran or whatever, where all of the people and you all have a favorite. And that Guns N' Roses was like that. I mean, it wasn't, people didn't just know Axl. They knew you, Duff, Izzy, they knew Steven. Like, y'all had a look, y'all had like, I mean, it was so organic, but if you'd casted it, you couldn't have cast it better. Like, y'all had identities. I feel like that was part of it, is that, you were as famous as Axl was. Izzy was as famous as you were. You know what I mean?
There was definitely identifiable personalities in the band. I know from being in it. I mean, how that projected to the public, I'm not really sure, but being in the band, it was a very defined group of individuals, so.
Is that part of the reason why you've made it such an important thing with the Conspirators to have Miles' name? It's always in the billing. It's not just Slash. It's not just the Conspirators. It's with Miles Kennedy, featuring Miles Kennedy.
That's a good question. I mean, when it first started out, I was doing the solo thing, and then Miles came along, and we agreed that Miles would be introduced as part of this thing. It was he and I. And so we went out and toured that way for the first couple of years as Slash featuring Miles Kennedy, which was, I never intend, I might do a solo thing and drive it and put it together and spearhead it and whatever, but I like to be involved with the people I'm involved with. And I like it to be more of a group effort in anything that I've ever done. So when it came time to, I started working with, who became the Conspirators, there was such a strong band there that when we did our first record, I felt like they needed to be recognized, not just my side guys. And that's where the Conspirators part came in. So it did make for one of the longest names in rock and roll, but I thought it was important that everybody was given credit for their input on the thing. So had I known going into it, I might have just called the whole thing the Conspirators or something, but it started out as a solo thing, and then it snowballed into something else.
Well, you seem like you really think in terms of a band mindset, because even before this, it was Slash's Snake Pit. It wasn't just, you could have just released it as Slash, people like, if I feel like you really have a band mentality and everything.
It is a band mentality thing. You're right. I mean, that's really what it's all about. I've always been into bands, not like guys with their side artists. I mean, there's room for that too, but I've always believed in like a band,
So what's next for both the Conspirators and, of course, for Guns N' Roses? You got two things going on.
A lot of touring right now, COVID permitting. We're out on the road through March with the Conspirators, and then Guns N' Roses has makeup tours for Europe, South America, and Australia. That's going to go from the summer through the end of the year. And then the Conspirators are going to do that same trek, Europe and Australia and South America and Asia at the beginning of 2023. Okay. So that's the immediate future. I can't really think beyond that at the moment. That's a handful in itself.
Absolutely. Have you ever thought, this would probably be a little too exhausting for you, but has there ever been talk that like the Conspirators would open for Guns N' Roses, just do a package thing together?
there's definitely, you know, like festivals and stuff where, you know, the opportunity to do that is there, but it is too much. It's too, I put as much into this as I do with Guns, really, when it comes down to it. Although Guns is still 3 hours a set. So between the two, it would be like 5.5 hours.
Well, you obviously are very busy. I know the 4 album by Conspirators with Miles Kennedy is out now. I know you're not at liberty to really talk about Guns N' Roses' current music, or future music, but I am looking forward, hopefully, to hearing you've put out a couple songs.
There's stuff coming, you know, for sure. That I can say.
All right. Well, we'll have to catch up when that happens, and I'll ask you all about that for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
In the meantime, Nagel the Snake said,
what's his name?
Nagel, like Patrick Nagel, the painting, because I think if
okay.
Nagel painted a snake, it would look like this.
He's,
you know,
really
very white, and he's a sweetheart, and he enjoyed this conversation very much, as did I.
Yeah. I could tell.
He was very attentive.
He was very attentive. Yeah.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day, Slash, and it was great catching up with you.
I'll see you around. Cheers.